Welcome to our present state versus history on speaker. Here we are focused on the current events of our culture through the principles of our history, trying to make sense of the culture and the mindset of today. I am your host, Ray Mayfield. Well, okay, folks, here we are back on the pod. Get it out if I can get my words out of here right. There's so many things that's going on right now that we don't even have to look back into the far history, I guess. We can look back in what I call our current history, which just right back around the 1900s, the turn of just right at 100 years of this nation being birthed, and it was the wealthiest nation already, right in what was it, 1905 in that area. The United States had already grown to be one of the most powerful, wealthiest nations on the earth, even though it had like 5%. Our country here is like 5% of the land mass, and yet we seem to manage to acquire the vast majority of the wealth until we've been bombarded with this attack upon our systems. And right now we got fuel prices going out of the roof, and we got all this going on over in UK, and seems like everybody's kind of got focused on fuel prices, and all I hear in the scuttlebutt out here is about how these old greedy capitalists are just trying to take advantage of everybody, and there's price gouging going on, there's fuel prices and yada yada. And I'm not going to say there's not some people taking advantage and making some serious amounts of money, but all of those things, I'd rather have all of that going on and still be in a free enterprise capitalist system that is in a free country, rather than this socialist jargon nonsense that they've been pushing in this country for so long. When you look at the UK, they're invading over there. If socialism was such a great thing, I can remember in my lifetime where that country was under the Soviet Union and communism, and so they know firsthand what all that communism and socialism stuff's all about. And if it was such a great thing, why are they taking up arms and trying to keep them? Why aren't they saying, "Oh, come on in, take over. Yeah, we want to go back under that," because it ain't a good thing, and they know it isn't. Back when all this rioting and carrying on going on in the 60s was going on in this country, and Martin Luther King was marching for equality of civil rights, and we had a group rose up called the Black Panthers, if anybody remembers any of that. And they were pushing this socialist communist propaganda, and one of their founders was the founder, the one that started pushing the whole thing and to get things really going, was a man named Eldridge Cleaver. And, he promoted that Marxist pollution all through that whole carrying to get to powers. And then they end up having a big shootout, and he fled the country. In fact, he got shot and ended up fleeing the country, and was, what was it? He was in exile 8 years, I believe it was, running around different communist countries. And when he finally come back to the United States after fleeing for 8 years, and made the statement that he'd rather be in prison in the United States than free anywhere else in the world. And he went on talking about different things and promoting the free enterprise system, promoting the freedoms. One of the statements that he made in one of his speeches was that even though the so-called black community or the poor people didn't have the blue chip of success, that just being a member of this country was their blue chip, and they had the opportunity to go and do anything. And you can read the story. There was, Reader's Digest, 1976, did an article called The Education of Eldridge Cleaver. You can look that up in the archives. You can read the whole story about how he was in prison and reading and, come to be the guy that he was, But in fact, it's made a statement in one of the books I was reading that he was the United States' prodigal son. He went, realized he was wrong, and come back and apologized for it, basically. And he did, and lived in the United States from then on after he come back. So this socialism nonsense is just that. We live in a system of economic capitalism or free enterprise, free markets, which is not a guarantee for to succeed. What it is you got the freedom to try. You got the freedom to buy what you want. You got the freedom to try what you want, and you also have the freedom to fail. There's no guarantee for the equality, but the thing of it is, we have these people in power that are deliberately trying to tear this country apart, just like they did back in the 1900s. This is not a new thing. This Mr. Franklin Roosevelt, everybody talks about what a great president he was, come in there. If you recall, the Depression started around, I believe it was 1929 when the Great Depression started. But in the 1920s, we were roaring and popping. Things were happening. But the power people, they couldn't stand it, and they didn't trust it. They wanted to get control. They started eroding things away in this country. It's been going on ever since then, and it's going on today. I'm going to read a little bit out of this book here called The 5,000 Year Leap. Now, this book was first published 1981 was the first copyright. This is a book that you can get from the National Center for Constitutional Studies. It's a book I recommend. It ought to be mandatory reading in high schools. It really should be. But anyway, there's a lot of good information on this book, in this book rather. But I'm going to read a little section out of this book, page 184, dealing with the Depression. It says here, the Depression that began in 1929 is generally considered the watershed that separates the new age from the old or rugged individual age. Before Franklin Roosevelt, we had the Republic, checks and balances, limited government, inalienable rights, the liberty and property, and all of that. After 1933, we began to get the centralized state, interventionist controls of industry. Actually, however, the inner spirit of the old America had been hollowed out in the 20s. The colleges had ceased to teach anything important about our heritage. You had to be a graduate student to catch up on the Federalist Papers with John Calhoun's Disquisitions of Government, on the Anything by Herbert Spencer, or with The Wealth of Nations. We were the ignorant generation. The Depression began our education, but the first great book in economics that we read was Marx's Capital. We had nothing to put against it. The talk of planning filled the air. We read George Sorrell and Stuart Chase on a need for national blueprints, national investment boards, and government investments. Keyes was still in the future, but the system was already being laid brick by brick, and Adam Smith was still a word of derision. So Adam Smith, whose principles were on the free market, free economy, was being kicked out of the colleges. Karl Marx was being brought in. They were teaching national power, big government, national thing, and look what we got today. This is exactly where we went. And folks, in 1905, this country was prospering. In 1920, they called the Roaring Twenties. Things were popping and booming and carrying on. And by 1929, as they started to put massive regulations on the government, as they started to try and centralize the power and control of things, this country slipped into the greatest depression it's ever known. And we're heading there again. I just read a thing today come up on my phone where the economists were forecasting the next 3 years is going to be you're going to be miserable. Well, guess what? They're all on the internet running their mouths about this fuel prices. And now, don't get me wrong, fuel prices suck. But there is a way that could be eliminated within a short period of time. And because 2 years ago, we were, what'd they say? Independent, what do you call it? Energy independent. Mr. Trump had us using our own oil. So you're going to tell me that we can't just give an order and get us energy independent again in a short period of time and get all that going and flood the market with crude oil and drive the prices down? We absolutely could. And that would probably be the number one tool to deter what Russia's doing right now over there. But we got a president or a regime up there. It's not just one man who refuses to do anything to help and support this nation. Why? Because they want inflation up. We didn't have no inflation going on here a few years ago. We had good oil and we had minimum wage that was sustainable. If you all recall, it's been just about a year that they started forcing the minimum wage up, and they've hiked it up, and they're going to keep hiking it on mandatory increases on it. And when you got wages that are out of kilter with the flow of cash flow and economics, then guess what you get? Inflation. Guess what you get? Higher prices. We got a president who gets in public platform and says that we need to raise your wages without raising the cost of goods and services. Really? That is impossible. You cannot do it. There is not a sustainable way to raise wages that does not affect anything else. You can say, well, that don't got anything to do with this. Well, it absolutely does, because it's been just about a year, and that's just about how long it takes those kinds of things to attrition out into the society. But our American society seems to be 100% forgetful when it comes to anything. We go from one little turmoil to the next turmoil and forget the last one. We've got wage increasing. Now we've got these fuel prices going up. And guess what that's going to do? That's going to raise food prices. That's going to raise everything up. We're just repeating the days of the Great Depression. But you know what they found out about the days of the Great Depression? Was those people who came in with the solution to all the havoc that was going on in industry in those days, because they had problems. That's why they needed all these solutions. They had strikes. They had businesses that were just going through these cycles, ups and downs. And I can go on and on about all of it, but it's not important, because what's important is the folks that were instigating and adding to the chaos and the mayhem in the society that was happening in the industrial move is the same ones that ended up in the positions of politics where they had the solution for the problem to create these national institutions that we're still dealing with today. We come along with all these new big plans, and we got this bigger government, and we've overreached all of these things because we've eroded away at our Constitution and our republic that we're supposed to be operating under free enterprise with free economics. You know, the whole word capitalism, you know what capital is for all those of you guys that just work a job and you don't know what it means? Capitalism is just the money you operate on. It's the capital. The working capital. It is the sum total of all of the investors' money that's put in towards the corporation to operate on to keep things moving when the productivity cycles make their swings. It's not profit. We take all these greedy capitalists out here and swing them from a tree, like somebody said on the internet. Oh, well, just hang them all. Okay, let's do that. Let's take that logic to its logical conclusion. Let's take all these greedy capitalists out here and let's just hang them. Well, how many of them greedy capitalists owns the company that you're working for that's drawing your paycheck? So what just happened to your paycheck? What just happened to your means to supply your family? What just happened? Because see, we don't even want to talk about these things till we feel the pain. This is the problem in this country, is we don't understand the relevance of the pendulum when it swings. We've got to get back to the realities of how things operate. And we got to get back to the way, you know, back in the early 1900s when things were hopping in this country, the majority of the people in this country were responsible for their own welfare, their own living, if you will. They had a trade. They did something to generate their own source of income. They weren't working a job. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with working a job. I've worked for a lot of other people. My dad worked for somebody his whole life. That's not the issue here. That's all part of the system, but it takes all of us. It takes the job worker, but it takes that greedy capitalist also.
Because if we